Welcome to the Control the Room podcast, a series devoted to the exploration of meeting culture and uncovering cures for the common meeting. Some meetings have tight control, and others are loose. To control the room means achieving outcomes while striking a balance between imposing and removing structure, asserting and distributing power, leaning in and leaning out, all in the service of having a truly magical meeting. Today, I'm with Natalie Nixon, creativity strategist and president of Figure 8 Thinking, where she helps leaders achieve transformative business results by applying creativity and foresight. She is also author of Creativity Leap, Unleash Curiosity, Improvisation, and Intuition at Work, the editor of Strategic Design Thinking, and regular contributor to Inc. magazine. Welcome to the show, Natalie.
Thank you, Douglas. It's a real joy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So for starters, let's talk a little bit about how you got your start. How did you become creativity strategist?
Well, it's been a very loopy journey. I have a background in cultural anthropology and fashion, and I decided many decades ago not to get burdened with trying to narrow myself down. And I actually got that advice as a teenager. I used to be really into radio, and I volunteered on early Sunday mornings on a local AM radio show just to kind of help out behind the scenes. And the woman, I'm so sorry, I'm forgetting actually now her name. That's horrible. But she was asking me, I was getting close to graduating from high school, what did I think I want to do? And she looked at me and she said, the older you get, the more people are going to try to narrow you down. But if that's not your thing, don't be narrowed down by that. Follow your heart, follow what interests you. And combined with that, I have amazing parents. My sophomore year in college, fast forward, I was very nervous about what my major was going to be. I wanted to make sure I got a good job at the end of a very wonderful and expensive education. And I called home in tears because I didn't know what to decide on, because all of the impressive sounding majors where I thought you could get a good job at the end, I was either failing or I thought they were really boring. And my parents said, well, what are you interested in? And so I apologetically began to explain how much I loved anthropology and all these cool interdisciplinary Africana studies courses. And almost at the same time, they said, that's what you should major in. That's what you should study. And I was like, really? You'll be okay with that? And they're like, yep, that's what you should study. And my father said, if you follow your heart, if you study what you love, you'll have to turn away opportunities. And it was this huge load that was lifted off my shoulders. And this was wonderful permission to follow my heart. And that is something I have been steadfast about my entire life, most of my life, and my entire career. And so that loopy background in cultural anthropology and fashion has been super useful in the work that I do today as a creativity strategist. There was a chapter in my career where I was a professor for 16 years. And the last 6 years of that time, I created and launched the Strategic Design MBA program. And it was very multidisciplinary and really an attempt to creatively disrupt graduate business education. We integrated design thinking into the way people were learning strategy and leadership and financial operations and branding. And I actually started Figure 8 Thinking, my company today, while I was still a professor. It was my side hustle. I gave a TEDx Philadelphia talk in 2014. And after giving that talk, I was invited into a lot of companies to share out and workshop with them what my talk was about, which was basically the future of work is jazz. And in my view, the most innovative organizations are improvisational. So, what's really cool about where I am in my work and life right now is that all of the divergent, disparate paths, especially from someone from the outside looking in on me, didn't make sense to them, totally made sense to me because I was just following my heart, which, by the way, is just a lot of courage. It's not easy to do, but the more we do it, the easier it becomes. I'm at this really magical, amazing moment in my life and my career where all of those super diverse experiences and skill sets I've developed come in handy as a creativity strategist. So as a creativity strategist, I made up the term, by the way. I never met a creativity strategist, but when I thought about what I really love and what I'm good at, that's what I decided I am. In my practice at Figure Eight Thinking, I help leaders and executive leadership teams and people to get to transforming their businesses. Sometimes lately I've been doing a lot more coaching, and it's transformation in their lives to make shifts by applying principles and techniques from creativity and from foresight. And I love it.
So much cool stuff there. And the maybe the most recent connection that I made when I was listening to you, and clearly passionate about what you do, by the way, and that's infectious. So I love that. But you mentioned not being tied down by one thing. And I just had Sarah Beth Burke on my show, and she has a book called More Than Your Title. And she had come up with this concept of the hybrid professional. So carving out these identities that are unique and that you can own. I just love that. I connected with Sarah Beth on this level of, I kind of felt like I myself was a hybrid professional and had gravitated toward it. And then here you are as well. I think people are finding their way there, and she's helping people that aren't realizing it. But
I love that. I'm glad that she's doing that. You know what's funny? The moniker for the Strategic Design MBA program was the MBA for hybrid thinkers. It was kind of, we were promoted as the best of design school meets the best of business school. So I am also a hybrid thinker. I think most of us are, really, but it gets drummed out of us in our educational pathways.
And the models that we learn and we get comfortable with also impact how we see the world.
That's right. That's right. One of the creativity leaps I encourage people to make is away from erring on the side of being a deep specialist to being a polymath, like Leonardo da Vinci, who was a mathematician and an artist and an astronomer. And my mom told us when we were really young, all learning is interconnected. And that's what you see that polymaths really get and understand, that something they learn in the sciences is really going to form the way they understand history, is really going to understand the way they understand carpentry, and et cetera, et cetera.
It's, as a facilitator, I often think back to the moments in my early career where I was sitting in the room listening to two people who were in the heat of an argument and thinking to myself that you're saying the same thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the polymaths, these hybrid thinkers, that's a real strength, right? They can see past the veneer.
Yes.
Because they can see those deeper connections.
Right. When you decide to be okay with being a hybrid and having these multiple interests, you really are honing your ability to be a systems thinker, a systems designer. It was only about 5 months ago that I realized that studying Africana studies was really, and this was 35 plus years ago, that was my first foray into systems design and systems thinking. I wasn't equipped with the language or the lens to understand it as such back then. But now, that's the value of that training of ways to understand problems and the interconnection between things, because we were studying people of African descent throughout the diaspora around the world. And so you really were getting into understanding things as networks and nodes and the cascading effects when something over here in the system shifts, how that has an effect in all other dimensions of the system. And that came from one of my majors being so, I don't know if the right word would be multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, felt very interdisciplinary. But yeah, that's something I only was able to articulate as such only like a few months ago.
I was just working with a client recently, and they were debating whether or not interdisciplinary was too restrictive and that they should refer to themselves as transdisciplinary.
Yes, that's a good one.
Yeah, I was looking at this chart and I was like, oh yeah, that does make sense. You got interdisciplinary, and then transdisciplinary is where you're looking at all the interconnectedness between them and more of the holistic kind of systems.
Yeah, transdisciplinary probably is a bit more accurate. Yeah.
So I also love this moment that you shared about just that unburdening that happened when you had these notions that there was a way to move through the world, and a trusted advisor told you, no, it doesn't have to be this way. And I think that if more leaders were to treat their employees that way, and we brought together teams that help them understand that, like, there's many ways to carve out the road in front of them, we'd see a lot more innovation.
We'd see a lot more innovation. I think we'd see a lot more productivity because, in my view, we are basically having to show up to work each day in drag. It's like Natalie's greatest hits, best of. And, no one really gets to see. Like, I just got back from my social ballroom dance classes, mask on, because this is still COVID quarantine. But today I was practicing the Roomba and West Coast swing. And, there's so many dimensions of people we work around every day that we have no idea what makes them tick, what is actually informing the way they understand the marketing strategy or the financial model or the sales pitch, that if we invited them to share those other sides of themselves, then they'd be a lot happier. They'd be a lot, they wouldn't, it takes work disguising parts of yourself. It takes work trying to put on whatever, fill in the blank the facade is that seems to pass as appropriate. I believe that, what if the KPIs in organizations, the key performance indicators, also included elements of creativity? And the way I think about creativity, if it included how wondrous you are, how you really are applying rigor to things, and not rigidity, but rigor, and given the time to do that, and how you ask better and different questions, and how you really lean into improvising and being adaptive. And it would be hard at first because it would be such a culture shift for people to be like, really? That's what you want me to do? It's okay. I won't be penalized. But ultimately, it would be inviting people to relax a bit, to share more of their full human selves.
I love that. I was thinking in my head as you were wrapping up, it's like, we're letting them be more human. And then you said, share more of their human selves. Mm-hmm. And it's just something I've been talking about a lot for a while around. I have this belief that with the onslaught of AI and automation, there's going to be tons of things that computers continue to do better than we do. And especially when you think about the rote, kind of redundant, just repetitive stuff, they're going to take on more and more and more of that stuff, even the complicated and complex versions of that. And we're going to have to show up more and more as humans. So what you're speaking about right there is going to be even more important as time goes on.
To me, that's the silver lining of this fourth industrial revolution. You're absolutely right, Douglas, that there's going to be more room for the human to show up. But are we prepared for that? Because, task-related stuff, the robots have it, the algorithms have got it down. So the organizations that are first to make space for, hire for, incentivize more of the human to show up, they're going to be the organizations that attract the best talent and retain people in more interesting ways.
So let's talk a little bit about how that manifests. And you mentioned something a moment ago that caught my ear because it's one of my favorite topics, and that's questions. Mm-hmm. So how do we get asked questions, and what are some of your favorites?
Well, I have been deeply influenced by the work of Warren Berger, who wrote A More Beautiful Question. I also, probably because Warren in his book referenced Ian Leslie. Ian Leslie wrote a great book called Curious. And Ian explains that, curiosity is the product of an information gap. You need to know just a little bit about something to want to know more. And we see that in toddlers, right? They touch something, they taste something, they bump into something, they see something, they hear something, and all of a sudden they want to understand and learn a little bit more. And so I define creativity. I think about creativity as toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems. And the way we can get better at that toggling, the way we can get better at exercising our creativity is through what I call the 3 I's. And the 3 I's are inquiry, improvisation and intuition. And that inquiry piece is super important. I was just saying to someone earlier today, nothing bad ever follows the phrase, I wonder what would happen. Like not really, nothing bad ever follows that phrase. It always leads to exploration, discovery, experimentation. And somewhere along the way, we are penalized for asking questions. And obviously, when you ask a question, you don't know the answer. Obviously, you're admitting ignorance, but so what? It's really the beginning of identifying something new. And so what Warren Berger found in his research is that the most innovative companies practice inquiry-based leadership. They ask questions of themselves. They encourage questions from their teams. And he has a really beautiful heuristic, which is that they start with asking why. Like why do we only hire people from those sorts of schools? Why? Why do we only have anyone here over age 50? Why? Why don't we ever sell to the Southern Hemisphere? And then they diverge even further to what if? What if we started, recruiting people who have maybe a high school diploma and rich professional experience? And what if we started selling our stuff to Brazil, the Brazilian market? And then it converges into how questions. So how might we do that? And it's just the first time I started reading Warren Berger's work was when I was a professor heading up the strategic design MBA program. And what I was first attracted about that series of question asking is that it was really aligned to design thinking, a design thinking process of doing a lot of divergent, convergent thinking. So curiosity is everything. And so, yeah, some of my favorite questions are, I wonder if, fill in the blank. And I just posed a question. I actually think it comes from the second book from Warren Berger, which I have. It's called The Book of Beautiful Questions. And there's a great question in there. What would I do if failure was not an option? Like, what would I do if I knew for certainty, like, this won't fail? So you put failure off the table. What would you then try? What would you go for? And I think it's just such a titillating question. It's a really good one. What are some of your favorite questions?
Oh, gosh. Well, as a facilitator, maybe one of my favorites is, why don't we just do that?
Good one.
Anytime I love getting the group talking, so anytime I can pose a question that just gets people, I don't know, even who haven't we heard from? Love that one. Because especially dealing with an overtalker, I don't really have to point them out. I don't have to call on the people who aren't being as included. And then maybe the other thing is, there's another great question for a facilitator, which is, why am I talking?
So why? I'm writing these down. These are good. Why did we just do that? And who haven't we heard from? I like those.
Yeah, they're fun ones. And, I stumbled on, as it's been a while now, but D'Angelo's book, White Fragility, has a facilitation guide with it. And there's some really amazing questions. One of the things I picked up from her was, what did you mean by that? Which, depends on the tone you use. But if you're gracious with that question, it can be a really soft out for someone who said something that didn't consider the impact of what they were saying. And they might say something very offensive without intent. But as we know, intent does not matter. And so, what do you mean by that? And then if they have to explain it, then they start backing away from it really quick, and it can create a safer place for everyone.
You bring up a really good point about tonality, delivery, eye contact if possible, body language. So what is this? 70% of what we communicate is through our body language. I have a couple others I just want to share real quick. So I love Esther Perel, the psychoanalyst. I have a professional crush on her. She's just so brilliant. And I listened to her podcast, which is called Where Should We Begin? But one of the questions that she poses regularly, and sometimes she poses it as a directive, and some as a declarative statement. Sometimes she poses it as an interrogative statement or interrogative, and it is say more. Like the person just said something and that's really loud, and so say more. And it's just so simple, and it just invites people to say more. And the other 4 set of questions, I shared this next one, especially with, I started an online creativity, a group coaching online creativity course. And I shared how when we decide to make creativity leaps, these are major mind trips. Like, you have to fortify your brain. And so one of the person who I consider she's a distant teacher, I've never met her, but I've learned so much from her, is Byron Katie. And so she's done something called The Work, and there are 4 questions. And so the 4 questions are, is that true? Is that really true? What are you experiencing with that thought? Like, how are you feeling physically, emotionally, all that? And what would you be without that thought?
Ooh.
Which is, right? That's the best one. What would you be without that thought?
Nice. Yeah, I really love this idea of challenging people's mindsets or thinking patterns. You know, what sorts of frameworks are they bringing to the situation that may be incongruent with everyone else? So I love these lateral thinking stuff. So saying, if you were to remove that, what would surface for you? That's really cool.
And the frameworks are stories. A story is a framework. It's stories that we've been telling ourselves, and you get to interrupt the story. You actually can interrupt it. That's another Esther Perel gem.
Yeah, I like that. Interrupting the story.
She's another one. Oh gosh, she's so wise. There's another one. She says, "Are you ready to have a revolution with your mind?" Yeah,
I think so. Maybe that sounds like a great Wednesday afternoon. I want to come back to your point a moment ago about eye contact and tonality. And it's something we were talking about. It surfaced this point of our pre-show chat that I wanted to also kind of stitch together, which was this notion of equitable distribution. And so when we think about the tools, we both have good sounding mics, we have headphones, we have solid internet because I haven't seen any issues here. I mean, when we're bringing together folks for creative collaborations in this time of COVID, it can, equity is a real challenge when we think about supporting everyone's needs.
Yes, absolutely. And before I get into the equity piece around meeting up, connecting during remember that book, Love in the Time of Cholera? Someone read the book, Love in the Time of COVID. Maybe someone already has. About tonality and physicality. I'm very conscientious about kinesthetic learning and making and moving in order to understand, and how we embody learning, how sometimes we're not even aware why we're terrified to do something, and we have to be conscious of how we're stiffening up or how we're feeling queasy in our stomach, and like, what was that first experience that where that way of reacting helped us and now may not be so helpful. It's more of a barrier. But being very conscientious about movement comes from my background studying dance. I studied dance since I was 4 years old. So I mentioned earlier in our conversation about being at ballroom dance class earlier today. It's some of the most joyous moments in my week is being at dance class. There are moments literally when I'm in class, either in my private lesson with my instructor or in a group class, where I remember myself as 5 years old, like excited, like, okay, when do I get to try it? When do I get to do it? and being so happy to be moving and communicating in that way. So I just wanted to mention that. But yes, you're absolutely right that we have to have a conscientiousness about equity or lack thereof when we're talking about meeting and connection in this virtual environment. I like to watch 60 Minutes on Sunday nights because it's very nostalgic for me. Just that like tick, 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 like that's,
yeah.
That sound, the introduction. Yeah. It reminds me of when I was much, much younger. And sometimes on a Sunday night, I just want to hear the tick, 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 tick and see who they're interviewing. And last Sunday, they were looking at the city of Tampa, Florida. And in Tampa, Florida, because of the repercussions of COVID, 7,000 children did not show up for school. And they followed this social worker and her team as she went from home to home, motel to motel, grandma's house to grandma's house, to figure out where these little kids were. And one of the things they reported at the end of the segment was that actually they had connected and identified all but 700 kids, which is amazing to me that they were able to figure all that out. But one of the children they interviewed was a teenage girl, about 15 or 16 years old. When they tracked her down, she was living in a motel room with her dad, her mom, her sibling. And the interviewer with journalist was asking, so how's it coming along with your work? How are you doing your work? She said, oh, it's fine. It's fine. And says, I'll sit outside on the stairwell and I'll do my work that way. And the journalist said, well, what are you using to do your work? And she goes, oh, my phone. So she's using her phone to read a history lesson and try to figure out algebra or geometry or whatever they're learning at that point. And then she said, well, sometimes I'll take a walk. And then the journalist said, well, it must be hard. There's so many people around. She says, yes, it can be hard, but I'll take a walk about a mile down the road to a park. But then the journalist was talking over the segment saying, but at the park, there's no Wi-Fi. So she has peace and quiet, but she doesn't have Wi-Fi. And if we don't factor in issues around equity, around access, the fallout of the people who've been left behind, because we don't, for a number of reasons, we don't have systemic structural support for people who are not at an advantage just out the gate, it's going to affect all of us. This idea that we can't split up the pie differently because I'll get a smaller slice. No, equity is not about making sure we divide up the current pie differently. The equity is about expanding the size of the pie so that everyone benefits. And I borrow a lot from the principles of universal design. Universal design is about designing for people who are differently able. So the OXO kitchen utensils, that's an example of universal design, where the designer's wife had horribly arthritic hands, and so he made the spongy handles for the spatula and the whisk so that it would be comfortable for her. Well, it turns out that when you design for people who are differently able, it's actually better designed for everybody. Everybody loves OXO kitchen tools. So this idea about designing for the least amongst us actually raises the playing field for everybody. And we see that in, the microfinance examples out of Bangladesh, the gentleman, the economist who won a Nobel Peace Prize, where it turns out there are models from understanding how to provide access for emerging entrepreneurs who don't look like folks in Silicon Valley, who are brown women in Southeast Asia from rural villages. That actually is a model for economic development that can be scaled. That also, the Tata car in India. I lived in Sri Lanka making bras and panties for the Victoria's Secret brand. It's an amazing chapter of my life. And, it's common in Colombo to see a family of 5 on a scooter. No helmets.
Wow.
Little baby, toddler up front of mom, 2 little kids smushed between mom and dad. And, they're jamming. They're going about their day. And countries like Sri Lanka, India said, this could be a big problem if there's a lot of motor accidents on the roadway. So how could we design? How could we lean engineer a car that would address the needs of this emerging middle class and really strip down an affordable car that's safe and that has some bit of a covering that might for all intents and purposes be like a scooter with the metal structure outside. I'm over exaggerating, but. It turns out that automotive design is of interest to Daimler, Chrysler, and to other major automotive companies. So when we design for the least amongst us, when we realize that we are all interconnected and that we must provide equitable solutions during this time of COVID, it raises the bar, it raises the opportunity and the quality of life for everybody. For me, it's take your medicine now or take it later. But we got to deal with this. Otherwise, we'll take our medicine later.
That's fantastic. I was thinking you were saying that, it's not a matter of just a smaller piece. It's like the pie is getting bigger, but it also tastes better too.
Yeah, exactly. Tastes a lot better.
Yeah. So I want to come back to your MBA, and I always like to ask people about a meeting or a gathering that they were part of or they designed that they thought was more magical than normal. And if nothing else comes to mind, I am curious about the workshops you ran for the future of work as jazz. Like, how did you bring those concepts to people in a way that was engaging and memorable?
Well, the meeting that did come from mind is the strategic design MBA program attracted some really remarkable, amazing people. A lot of whom I'm still in touch with and connected with. A lot of the alums I still am in touch with, and it was a very boutique program. I mean, I'm in Philly. I'm in the shadows of Wharton, for heaven's sake. And they're like, design what? I mean, that's not completely fair. They've started to embrace design thinking and human-centered innovation. But, I felt like a David in a sea of Goliaths most of the time. And I wanted to always create a very special exit for our graduate students. So we would have these final dinners. And I bit off of something that NPR does. NPR has they've often done stories about your life in 3 songs. So I would always ask everyone to send me what's your life in 3 songs. So the playlist at dinner was people's magical songs. And people say, whose song is that? Oh, why did you pick that one? And so it was always this wonderful conversation. And I had so many amazing colleagues in the city of Philadelphia who would gift their space, really cool spaces, and say, sure, you can have the dinner here. And I worked with a really cool dude named Ben Walmer, who he's this interesting background in farming and engineering and design. And he had this incredible, I think the name of his company was Highlands Dinner Club. But it was basically this mobile dinner party, and he would have scavenger hunt clues, and that you'd end up in a little bit of the woods somewhere. And he would always curate these amazing locally sourced meals. So that to me is an example of a meeting that was a convening, a gathering that became a bit of a ritual for the program. And I wanted them to know that I thought they were special, and I wanted to give them a special sending off that would be memorable. And I was thanking them for taking the chance with me, because they took a chance to get an MBA, a strategic design MBA program. And in exchange, they told me the program changed their lives. They shared that they shifted to a different trajectory. And even if it wasn't overtly a different trajectory, mindset shifts. So that's an example of really memorable meetings and convenings.
That's fantastic. Well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you today. And I'm really inspired to go create wonder and maybe be a little more rigorous about it. So thank you for all the words. And I just want to give you a moment to leave our listeners with a final thought.
Well, I guess my final thought is, first, if you're so moved, definitely check out what I'm up to at figure8thinking.com. And if you're curious about the creativity leap, you can download a free sample chapter on the website. It's just the top banner. And something I posted on Instagram this week, it was kind of an extension out of coming out of Thanksgiving time. I post a lot of little quotes from my book and just what's top of mind for me. And I posted that gratitude is the gateway to wonder. And so, Douglas, you and I are talking just after Thanksgiving. It's the first week of December. And sometimes it can be really hard to figure out what we're grateful for during such a really challenging time like COVID. But if you do a thought experiment of just observing 5 to 10 objects in your immediate surroundings and think about the people unknown to you who are responsible for making that thing come to be, or because of that thing that reminds you of that trip you had and then the people you met. Gratitude is the gateway to wonder, and wonder is something that we really need to indulge in more than ever. So that's a thought I would leave people with, that gratitude is the gateway to wonder.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much for being on the show, Natalie, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Douglas.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Control the Room. Don't forget to subscribe to receive updates when new episodes are released. And if you want more, head over to our blog where I post weekly articles and resources about working better together. voltagecontrol.com.